Considering the events of everyday life, it's fair to say that a good number of us seem to see things in black and white, just like the representative parts of the yin-yang symbol. Just take a look at human history. For example, while we may have the likes of Nelson Mandela or Abraham Lincoln, who seem to have made a good name of themselves while they walked the earth, thereby representing the yang sides of the Taoist, others who marred the essence of the human existence like Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, thereby representing the yin side of the Taijitu symbol. As a result, sometimes it's tough to judge a situation that blurs our understanding of good and evil. One great example of such a situation is when it comes to the divisive story of Fritz Haber, a man who both saved and destroyed the world. How did this Nobel Prize winner become such a divisive figure that people refuse to attend his award ceremony despite the fact that most would say that a good number of us are alive today because of his award-winning work? Let's take a look at Fritz Haber, the man who was able to save and destroy the world in one lifetime. Guano. Before we dive into the life of one of the most impactful yet controversial figures in the history of science and mankind as a whole, we must understand the situation that the world was in before Fritz Haber made his mark on the world. You see, back in the day, there was a certain kind of place that was in high demand to many countries on Earth. Interestingly, and probably surprising to you guys, this place was simply an island full of bird poop. While most of you might wonder why such a place may be in demand, especially when these birds seem to have a bullseye for anything that moves so that they could use it as target practice for their poop, you'd find that back in the day, the demand for such a place was so strong, even the US government would sponsor anyone who makes such a discovery today. Want to know why the US is protecting 10 islands worldwide today? Well, the simple answer is because most governments would love to place their hand on miles upon miles of these potentially 100 feet high mountains of solidified poop, which is known as guano. Even back then, guano was considered to be so valuable, 1 pound of it sold for about $76. In fact, 4 pounds of this stinky stuff went for 1 pound of gold. What makes this stinky stuff so valuable, you may ask yourselves as you wince at the prospect of the smell? Interestingly, the answer lies within us, well, at least within the human body. Those who paid attention in biology class would tell you that the human body is made up of several elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and perhaps most importantly, nitrogen. Apart from learning about the elements that are integral components of our makeup, those who paid attention in those science classes would also be able to tell you that nitrogen is part of the amino acid that forms proteins within the human body. This is due to the fact that it is part of hemoglobin, the compound that carries oxygen in our red blood cells, thereby making it an important part of our DNA and our RNA. As such, nitrogen is essential to all living things on the planet. As such, it is important that humans get their fair share of nitrogen, which we do by eating plants or animals that eat plants. Where do the plants get their nitrogen from? The soil. Considering this, it becomes clear that it is important that the soil is filled with enough nitrogen to sustain life on the planet. The problem with this is that when farmers till the same soil year after year after year, the amount and the integrity of the nitrogen in the soil is bound to reduce drastically over time as people harvest the nitrogen after it. As such, at some point in time, the world had to reckon with the fact that it's running out of nitrogen. This deficiency in nitrogen was bad for mankind and all other species on the planet because a lack of nitrogen in the soil would mean that plants would become incapable of producing enough chlorophyll to perform the process of photosynthesis. This in turn would lead to plants that are stunted and susceptible to weeds, pests, and disease. In the face of such a troubling future, farmers and scientists felt that the only way to ensure that the soil is replenished with the nitrogen that it has lost over the last decades and centuries of farming. Of course, this is easier said than done. Fortunately, the answers lay in good old guano. You see, guano is made up of about 20% nitrogen. So potent was this stinky fecal matter that even the ancient Incan farmers deduced that guano was able to make their crops grow strong even in places that didn't make sense. The desire for guano even caused a war between Spain and its colonies in South America. Unfortunately, this demand for guano soon led to its scarcity, as the entire world grabbed at all the guano they could find even before the 20th century. As such, we needed to find a way to get the nitrogen our soil desperately needed. The search for nitrogen. Presented with this search for nitrogen, many scientists took on the challenge to create this element for our soil, especially as they hoped to avoid the devastation such a deficiency of nitrogen in our soil would cause. For example, a British chemist named William Crook speculated back in 1898 that if the world didn't do anything about the dwindling nitrogen in the soil, especially with the ever-growing human population, it was quite likely that the world would be dying of starvation within 30 years. According to Brooks, the answer to this problem could be found in a lab. This may be because nitrogen actually isn't a rare element. In fact, the nerds watching would be able to tell us that our very air is made up of about 78% nitrogen. Unfortunately, as we cannot make use of the nitrogen in this form, we must look elsewhere for our answer. As such, scientists look at the makeup of this element. Apparently, when two atoms of nitrogen triple bond together, this makes it very difficult to break up because this bond is actually among the strongest in the world because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to break two atoms of nitrogen. However, neither lightning nor the bacteria capable of breaking the nitrogen atoms into two are capable of mass-producing enough nitrogen compounds to replenish the soil. This left room for chemists to give this nitrogen creation a shot. The first notable scientist that attempted to create nitrogen compounds at a large scale was George Hildebrand. He tried to achieve this goal by mixing nitrogen and hydrogen in a sealed flask so that he can create ammonia, which is one of the nitrogen-containing molecules that's found in guano. Despite trying to increase the pressure, he'd ultimately fail. So would others who'd give this effort a go over the next century. Fritz Haber. As such, one can see how Fritz Haber had a massive task ahead of him when he decided to take on this problem in 1904. Regardless, the low-level academic working at the University of Karlsruhe pushed on, and he supported Clara, his wife, who just happened to be one of the first women to get a PhD in chemistry, and his 2-year-old son named Hermann. After spending 5 years experimenting on the combination of nitrogen and hydrogen in high pressure and in high temperatures along with a catalyst that lowers the amount of energy needed to slip the nitrogen atoms, thanks to these efforts and the fact that he was also working as a technical consultant for a light bulb manufacturer, he was actually able to make the breakthrough the world desperately needed. That was because his job at the light bulb manufacturing company gave him access to limited materials such as osmium, which was a rare element at the time. This proved to be the perfect catalyst for his work, as it helped him create the ammonia he desperately wanted to create, and the rest, as they say, is history. Following the success of the ammonia-creating process, BASF, the largest chemical company in Germany, decided to commercialize the process, and before anybody knew it, they were producing 5 tons of ammonia per day. As a result, there were whispers that Haber might just have created a way of making bread out of the air. What may sound bizarre proved to be right because, with the fertilizers created from this process, farmers reported that they were able to grow 4 times the amount of crops that they had on the same farms as before. This has been linked to the quadrupling of the global population today. Amazing, right? Indeed, it is estimated that about 4 billion of us may not even be here today without Haber's breakthrough. As a result, Haber became a wealthy man. Apart from gaining a fortune, he was also promoted to the founding director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physical Chemistry in Berlin. With this power, he also gained acclaim in the scientific community, even becoming friends with the likes of Max Planck, a German theoretical physicist whose discovery of energy quanta won him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918, and the great Albert Einstein, the German-born theoretical physicist who is widely held to be one of the greatest and most influential scientists of all time. Haber was so close to Einstein, it was at his that Einstein had to bunk with when he left his first wife. Hearing all these wonderful things about this man, I'm sure it begs the question that how did this man become so reviled that some people refused to receive their Nobel Prize along with him? For the answer to that question, we turn to the events of World War I. World War I. Following Gavrilo Princip's assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie, Duchess von Hohenberg, in Sarajevo on 28 June 1914, the world braced itself for World War I. Ever the German patriot, Haber wanted to make his contributions to the war efforts, especially as the Germans were quickly running out of ammunition and firepower just a few months into the global conflict. As a result, he turned to his creation. You see, apart from giving our crops the boost they needed to grow, ammonium nitrate was also an explosive. In fact, there have been a series of ammonium nitrate disasters over the years, with the most recent being the catastrophic explosions that occurred in Beirut that killed more than 200 people in 2020, or the terrifying explosions that occurred in Kraiwald, Germany back in 1921 when an explosion in one of BASF's plants killed more than 500 people. These are just 2 of the explosions that have killed thousands and injured even more over the last century. Such is the explosive nature of Haber's creation. Recognizing this devastating potential, Haber actually lobbied to make use of his ammonia to create nitrate for explosives for the war effort. As the Germans used the ammonium nitrate to gain a foothold of the global conflict, it would not have been strange for one to reflect on the irony of the fact that what was created to sustain life was being used to take them in the multitudes. Despite the compound's explosive capabilities, Haber was so driven to help the Germans with the war effort that he decided to take things up a notch by making a gas heavier than air which would annihilate those who had the misfortune of breathing it in. As many of us may know, this was against war conventions of the time and even now. However, this didn't deter the Germans or the Allied forces who experimented with chemical weapons. Despite the reservations of others, Haber came up with chlorine gas with the belief that he would be able to bring the war to a quick end with this gas. Unfortunately, the horrible capabilities of this gas was quickly realized when the German troops caused the deaths of more than 5,000 Allied forces troops hiding in the trenches when they first released 168 tons of chlorine gas. It was a death akin to drowning on dry land. Despite being celebrated for his creations, Haber would be forced to come to terms with his actions when Clara took her life upon his return home to celebrate his success. As he pondered on why she would have taken her own life, he could not ignore the fact that she must have been devastated by her husband's role in such a heinous act. As there was never any direct proof that this is the cause of her tragic death, Haber left his son behind a few days after his mother's death so that he could return to the Eastern Front so that he could supervise a chemical attack on the Russian army. In total, the chemical attacks would claim more than 100,000 lives in World War I. The aftermath. Following the Great War, Haber would be ruined by the hyperinflation brought about by Germany's loss in World War I. As he tried to recover his wealth by attempting to distill gold from seawater, Hitler and his National Socialist Party came into power, which spelled bad news for Haber because although he was a proud German nationalist, he was also Jewish. He would be forced to resign his position as director at the institute so that he could move in solidarity with the other Jewish scientists who lost their jobs following the implementation of Hitler's regime. Unfortunately, Haber would never return to his status as he would lose his life within the next year on the 29th of January 1934. Unfortunately, Haber's death wouldn't bring an end to the damage he caused, as his institute would create a scentless cyanide-based insecticide which would eventually be used in the gas chambers that claimed millions of lives of his own people during Hitler's Holocaust. Consequently, one can see how Haber's legacy is one that would receive mixed receptions. On one hand, the man completed the yards on a problem that would ensure the sustenance of billions of lives. On the other hand, his work also brought about the death of billions. As we ponder on his impact on history, what do you think? Did the good Haber carried out override the lives that were lost at the hands of his creation? Please let us know in the comment section. Want to learn about other powerful or devastating weapons? Why don't we watch our video on US's missile submarines? For a change of speed, check out our video on why are some African economies growing but some are failing. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Until next time, goodbye.